Well, good morning, church. Welcome to our guests and visitors this morning. It is gorgeous out, isn't it? With this weather, as it's been getting hotter, I have noticed a lot more people carrying around their water jugs. Have you noticed that? There's a lot more water bottles around. And I don't know how this happened, but somehow we all decided that we needed the same water bottle. I don't know how this happened. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was the water bottle with the pull top stop lid, right? And we all needed, at least I did, it was revolutionary technology. I remember when that came out. I was like, I need to get one of those water bottles. I have to have one. And then in college, it was the Nalgene bottle. Do you remember that? Yeah, there were these crazy stories, at least when I was in college, of people climbing sheer cliffs, and this thing is on their carabiner, and somehow it comes off, it falls down, gets run over, doesn't break. I had to have a Nalgene bottle. And then it was the Yeti stainless steel water bottle, right? It wasn't just good enough to carry around water. You had to have your water cool for long periods of time, and whoever could keep it coolest the longest won. And that is why Yeti was so popular. And then after the Yeti, it was the Hydro Flask. Yeah, it was a modern design, right? Keeping your water cool had to look cool. And my kids got those. They had to have them. They put their stickers on them, and they'd personalize them. And now, today, the water bottle that I see all the time is this monstrosity right here. I don't know who decided that everybody has to have one of these. But everywhere I turn, especially on social media, someone is drinking out of a Hydro Peak. I don't get it. Now, I know that's kind of funny to see the evolution of water bottles, but here's my point. Sometimes I wonder what I would own, what I would have if I didn't know what everybody else had. I also wonder what I would want if I didn't already know what everybody else already had. I also wonder how much money I would save if I didn't know what you spent yours on. And sometimes in the deep recesses of my soul, I wonder what money I would have given away to people who have less than I have if I didn't know what the people who have more than I have had. That makes sense, right? I think you understand what I'm saying, though, right? My problem is that I know too much. I know too much about what others have and I don't. And the interesting thing about me is that this information makes me dangerously discontent. And the fact this information has the potential to actually take me places that I don't need to go. It lures me towards the edge of financial ruin. It lures me towards the edge of too much credit card debt. And it lures me towards making decisions that I normally wouldn't make. Today, we are continuing in our series through the life of Abraham, and we get to take a glimpse at someone who is a lot like us in this area, or maybe we are just a lot like Lot. Let's pick up his story in Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There, Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now, Bethel means house of God, right? In many ways, you could say that Abram was moving, when he moved up from Egypt to Bethel, he was kind of doing a coming of home of sorts to the house of God. He found himself in the wrong place in Egypt, right? And yet, he also found grace from God there. He found himself in Egypt, and yet God showed him grace in the wrong place, right? When God rescued Sarai from Pharaoh because of Abram's unsuccessful plan, God showed his grace to Abram even when he was in the wrong place. So Abram goes back to the place where he first built an altar and the last place that he left his God, and Abraham called on the Lord. By the way, this is not a bad plan for anyone who finds themselves in the wrong place. To go back to the place where you left God and start worshiping him and to call on his name. It's a great way to repent when you've been hanging around Egypt for too long. Now, the scripture says that Abram became very rich and wealthy when he made his journey up out of Egypt. And you think, wow, God really blessed him. Maybe being in Egypt wasn't so bad after all for Abram. And perhaps this was all part of God's doing. But remember, Abram's decision to go down to Egypt was not a good one. So when the Hebrew writer says that he became very wealthy, the Hebrew word for riches there is literally heavy. Abram's riches were very heavy. They were a burden. Think about it. Isn't it a burden to have something nice sometimes? You get a new car, and it costs a lot of money, and you're making those payments every month, right? And you get a dent or a scratch on it, and it just wrecks your whole rest of your month, right? Or maybe you just have to park it in the garage under Fort Knox lock and key because you're worried it will get stolen, and you're always worried about it. In fact, you park in the farthest parking lot spot in the parking lot because you don't want to get it hit or stolen or anything like that. Riches can be a burden to us, can't they? But not only that, I think riches do something to us. I read a quote by Thomas Carlyle where he said, "Adversity is sometimes hard upon a man. Adversity is sometimes hard upon a man. But for one man who can stand prosperity are 100 that will stand adversity." In other words, most of us, when adversity comes, we rise to the challenge and we meet adversity with our best character. However, our true character comes out when things start going really, really well for us. When we prosper. Dave Ramsey, the financial peace guru, he said, "Money just makes you more of what you already are." If you're a jerk, you become more of a jerk, right? If you're stingy, you become more stingy. If you're generous, though, you become more generous. So Abram comes out of Egypt rich, and it has the potential to change his character, doesn't it? Wealth has the potential to change him for worse and taint his reliance on God. But he's not the only one who's making it rain with sheep. Someone else is prospering by his close relationship with Abram. It's in Genesis 13, starting in verse 5. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. So we've heard about Abram so far, but we haven't heard a lot about Lot. For those who are just joining us in this series, when we first started looking at the life of Abram, we learned that Lot is Abram's nephew. Lot's daddy had died when he was younger, and Abram took in Lot as a surrogate, or Lot latched onto Abram. It's not really clear in the text what happened. Now, I don't fault Abram for this, but when the Lord called Abram to follow him, he asked him to leave his country, to leave his people, and to leave his family. But Abram didn't do that. And now we're going to see the beginning of what his disobedience will cost him here. And so Genesis chapter 13, verses 6 through 9 is where we're at. One more slide. There we go. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. So all the elements here for a family conflict have piled up here like dry kindling, just waiting for a match. Things could get heated really, really fast right here. Both of them are prospering, right? Both of them are becoming wealthy, but they're running out of land for their livestock, for the things that they have. The Canaanites and the Perizzites are in the land too with their flocks. And there's just not enough land, there's not enough water for both of them to reside in that area. And when someone becomes wealthy and they start feeling entitled and they aren't getting what they want, things can go south pretty quickly, can't they? However, even though Abram may have failed the first two tests that he had, not leaving his family and going down to Egypt instead of staying in the promised land, even though he failed those first two tests, he passes this third test with great, great success. And the test was not an easy one because it involved wealth. But Abram is an example of what every believer should do when there are disputes about material things. Abram had every right to tell Lot what to do here. Abram could have called Lot into his tent and said, look, I'm the adult here and you're the nephew. We've had a good run together here, but it's time for you to bugger off now and find your own land somewhere else. I'm taking first pick. Think of it like this. You own your own family business with a close relative. Maybe it's a brother or a sister, a nephew, a cousin. And you're the majority shareholder, 60-40, right? Your business is going gangbusters. You guys are doing awesome. You're in the black. It's going so well that you're busy all the time, and it's starting to take a toll on your relationship. You're not as close as you used to be to your business partner. The families are beginning to quarrel, and it's time to separate. You invite your business partner to breakfast, you roll out the map, and you show the Western and the Eastern divisions, and it's clear that the Eastern division is performing the best, right? Now, you're the majority stakeholder. You have the right to first choice. What do? Do you trust your own business sense, or do you trust God and let them choose? Abram trusted God. And he said, you choose, nephew. You choose. And guess what Lot chose? He chose the Eastern division. Genesis 13:10 through 13. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and he set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom, they were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. I want you to notice just a couple of things in these few verses. First of all, did you notice the mention of Egypt here? Okay. Once again, we see a decision to move down to Egypt, working its way back into this story. And I can't help but wonder if this wasn't Lot's water bottle decision. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, I wonder if Lot, in some way, was trying to get back to the wonder he had experienced in Egypt with Abram and what other people had in Egypt. Perhaps this was part of his decision-making process to be in a land that was like Egypt. Now, the author gives his audience a glimpse to this poor decision he made to go to the place that he chose. People who were reading Genesis at the time that it was written knew what God had done to Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what the author kind of alludes to here, right, in those parentheses. And that the place where they're talking about, it is no longer lush. It is no longer what Lot saw. It's not green and watered. Lot's business savvy and his desire to be in a place like Egypt, it's not going to last. And that's what the author is alluding to. We understand that. It says that he pitched his tents near Sodom, and the people of Sodom were wicked and sinning greatly against the Lord. And again, you have to wonder if Lot already knew this or not. He's been following his uncle around in Canaan, and the scripture never says that Abram pitched his tents near Sodom and Gomorrah. Why? Perhaps he had heard a rumor or two of what was going on in Sodom. Maybe he met some people from Sodom and Gomorrah on his journey through Canaan. Now, I want you to understand that Lot is a righteous man. So don't think that he is wanting to take part in the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't think it's that. Bible says in 1 Peter 2, 6 through 8, if he, talking about God, condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man, living among them, day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Lot, Peter says, was a righteous man. So I don't think Lot is making the decision based on a desire to sin with the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. I think he is making this decision based off his desire to be wealthy and live in a place like Egypt. And if that means moving in and becoming neighbors with wicked people, it was worth it to him. The last clue that his decision was a poor one was that it says, Lot set out towards the east. In God's providence, almost every time that you see a movement, in Genesis in particular, away from God and his blessings, it's a movement towards the east. Adam and Eve, after they sin, they move away from Eden, right? And they head towards the east, or at least that's the entrance that the guardian angel protects. He protects the east side, so we can assume that they move east. Cain, when he was exiled towards the east for killing Abel. The people who build the Tower of Babel, they head east to do so. And now I think you can understand John Steinbeck's book, East of Eden, and what it's all about. Our movement away from the garden and away from God is what it's talking about. That's where Lot was headed, east. But what about Abram? What's he going to do now that Lot has chosen the best land? What is Abram's future? How is he and his herds and his family going to survive? The Lord reassures him that he made the right decision to have faith. Genesis chapter 13, verse 14 through 18. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the land, the length and the breadth of the land, for I'm giving it to you. So Abram went to live near the great tree of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. So what can we learn from the life of Abram and the decisions of Lot? Well, I think we can learn a lot from both of them. But we learn, first of all, from Abram to look up first for insight. Abram may have tried to secure his future in last week's lesson by going down to Egypt, but I believe Abram learned his lesson. I think he learned his lesson. Abram has gradually learned to trust God and believe that God can provide for him no matter what the situation that he finds himself in. Abram gave up the choicest pasture land, and in return, God spoke to Abram and reminded him that he isn't losing anything at all. You haven't lost anything at all, Abram. God is giving all the land of Canaan to him and to his descendants forever. Abram built his third altar, but yet he still never built a house for himself. Because faith is not merely belief in the existence of God. Faith is actually trusting in God. You have to trust God. And you know what? Abram's faith proved to be a better long-term decision. His faith secured a much better future for him than his sight could have ever provided. And he was able to make that decision because he showed us how to look beyond the immediate. You know, the positive, I think, to any situation can be grasped pretty easily, can't it? We live in a culture that is driven by a desire for instant gratification or instant access to something we want or instant access to knowledge or something like that, or to have something delivered same day. Did you know Amazon can deliver same day now? It's incredible. Our preoccupation with the immediate satisfaction, though, I think can be very, very deadly. Instead of asking what's in it for me, we need to look at the long-term consequences. What are the drawbacks? What will happen if you wait? Abram teaches us that you find a better path for your future in the silence and the discomfort and the patience of waiting on God and asking Him to show you the way, and wait until He does. Now, we're going to learn next week that there is a time to move and a time to actually take action. But what would it look like for you to trust God with your decisions this week and to wait on His guidance? And the final thing that I think Abram teaches us is to look to be peace instigators. Abram had the right to choose first. He was the uncle. He was the patriarch. He put family ahead of fortune here. Relationships are more important than our rights. He said, Lot, we're brothers. We're all we've got now. Everyone else is gone from the old country. You and I are all that we got. And our relationship is more important than my rights. Here's how James puts it in James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. And I believe James is not only giving us insight why we fight each other, but he's giving us insight into the motives behind Lot's decisions. Because we can learn a lot from Lot's decisions. And the first is this: the temptation to drift east is so very strong. It is so strong. Did you notice that Lot has a lot of tents, but Lot has no altars? No altars. The text says nothing about Lot seeking the counsel of God to make his decisions. I believe Lot had gotten a taste of the good life down in Egypt, and he liked it. We don't know his financial portfolio before he got to Egypt, but we know what it was when he came back. He was rich, and he liked it. It says that Lot looked around and he saw. And what the author is doing is using that same phrase that he used earlier in Genesis when he talked about Adam and Eve, when Eve saw the fruit of the tree, that it was good. Lot saw the land that looked like Egypt. He saw the profitability of the place and not the wickedness of it. It was a decision that was based purely on sight. And so we learned that he saw, and then he chose, and then he pitched his tent next to Sodom. In the next chapter, we will see that Lot is living now in Sodom. And then in chapter 19, it will say that he was sitting in the gateway of Sodom, which means he had become a leading figure in Sodom. And then in the same chapter, when God is about to destroy Sodom, some angels come of the Lord, and they say to Lot, they say, get your family out of here, let's go, let's hightail it out of here. And it actually says that the pull of the world was so strong in Lot's life that even though he knows that these angels are speaking to him, saying they're going to destroy this place, it says these words, he hesitated. They had to grab him by the arms and drag him out of that place that was marked by judgment for God. My church, my brothers and sisters, it is so easy to drift east away from God and His blessing. And it happens gradually. It starts with a little more time at the office, or maybe you're hanging out more with those friends who you were trying to reach for Christ, but now have had the opposite effect on you. Or maybe it's the neglect of personal study in the Word for a couple of days, and it turns into a couple of weeks, turns into a few months, and now you aren't looking in your Bible or praying at all. It's so easy to drift towards the east, which leads to the second thing Lot's decision teaches us, the foolishness of being a world borderer. Abram had caused trouble in Egypt because he was out of place, and Lot caused trouble in Canaan because he was out of place. His heart was really in Egypt. And so he pitched his tent right next to a wicked city. He didn't see a place marked for judgment. He saw a place marked for advancement. Lot saw what the world had, and he wanted it for himself. He wanted that. If there's any reason I think people should come to church, especially in America, it is to hear often from preachers like me and preachers all over this country, don't be like the world. Don't be like the world. Don't be like the world. Don't crave what they crave. Don't desire what they desire. Don't strive for what they strive for. Don't be like the world, church. And we need this reminder, and we need it often. It's easy to get deceived by riches and worries of this world. This is how Jesus put it in Mark chapter 4, when he likened people who accept the gospel kind of like seeds that a sower plants. Mark 4, 18 through 19. He says, still others, there's people who are like seed sown among thorns. They hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness, isn't it? The deceitfulness of wealth and the desires for other things, they come in and choke the word, and they make it unfruitful. Lot didn't consider the cost it would be to his peace of mind. Lot didn't consider the cost it would be to his family to border the worldly place of Sodom. And the great irony of this whole story is if Lot's desire was to experience blessing, do you know what the best way he could have done to experience blessing? The best thing he could have done? Bless Abram. That's the best thing he could have. What did God say to Abram? His promise, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. But Lot wasn't thinking, how can I bless Abram? Lot was thinking, how can I bless Lot? And that's the third thing I think we learn from Lot, the heartache that greed brings. Instead of saying, Abram, you have been so good to me and kind to me. Uncle, you deserve first pick. Instead of giving Abram first pick, Lot chose what looked best to himself. But in the end, it led to tons of heartache in his life. Peter says that Lot was tormented day after day after day by the wickedness of his neighbors. He was tormented. I mean, who cares how big your house is or how much furniture in your house costs if you can't go to sleep at night? He lost the blessing of Abraham. He lost his peace of mind. he lost his ability to influence his neighbors. When he tried to warn them of the coming judgment of God, they laughed at him because they knew Lot, the guy who would do anything for a buck. But most of all, the heartache Lot experienced when he lost his family. This story is such a sad story to me because of how many times I have personally seen a man and the impact the rush of wealth has had on his family. It takes them to places where there wasn't a strong church for them to go to. Taking them to a place where they don't have a strong community of faith to get plugged into. Lot's two girls, we learn, they married men in Sodom. It never dawned on them to marry a man who worshiped Yahweh because I don't think they thought their dad cared very much about Yahweh. His two son-in-laws thought so little of their father-in-law that when he warned them of judgment, they laughed at him. His own wife became so in love with the world that she disobeyed the direct instruction of God and looked back at where her heart still was. The very last picture of Lot in Genesis is this. He's an old, poor, scared man living in a cave with his two daughters, whom he has impregnated after they get him drunk. That's what I call losing a lot. Money. And what money promises is the chief competitor for your heart and my heart. You may never declare bankruptcy. You may never get into credit card debt. You may be so good with your money that you may need to be the person who teaches others about how to use their money. But for the rest of your life and the rest of my life, money is going to compete for first place. And money and stuff is going to compete for first place with my heart. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The reality is, Abram and Lot, they actually represent two different types of believers. Peter calls Lot righteous 3 times. Lot believed in God. He was a righteous man. But what do we remember about Lot? Who names their kid Lot? You see, some believers are remembered by all that they have gained, and some are remembered for losing a lot. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3, he says, now remember, we're all building a house. Some of us are using gold and silver, and some of us using hay and straw. And someday, when the day of judgment comes, the Lord burns up all that is temporal. Some of us, in that day, we're going to lose a lot. We will be saved, like Lot, as if by fire, but we will not be rewarded. Lot may have been righteous in his position, but he was very carnal in his character. And there's a reason he is never mentioned in Hebrews 11 among the people that walked by faith, not by sight. And this story reminds us that the carnal believer loses a lot more than he ever gains. Amen? And so the invitation this morning, it is to look up, to continue to trust our futures and our fortunes into the hands of God. Because if you don't, I think you really could lose a lot. And so we're going to stand and sing this closing song. And as we do, if you'd like to respond to today's message by being baptized or through prayer, maybe you need to pray about something going on in your life in regards to your finances, you can meet some people in room 9 and they'll pray with you. Whatever your need may be, why don't you come to the front or go to room 9 while we stand and sing this closing song. Please stand.